Hi guys, welcome to part two, if I didn't lose you on that first one. So in part one of this two-parter series, I talked about this new study, new as of right now, this new study about D-lactic acidosis, brain fogginess, and SIBO, and the proposed link that's not really there with probiotic use. So that was the first video. If you hung in with me through that whole video, then kudos to you. You really want to feel better. I wanted to take a few minutes, not nearly as long of a video, to talk a little bit more about the star of the show and about this D-lactate thing and what it is and what the relevance is and kind of go into detail about that. So I mentioned this briefly in the other video, but D-lactate is very much like lactic acid that's produced in your muscles when you work out. So you work out, and if your muscles don't have enough oxygen to get the job done and to contract and still move, your body can still make ATP, still make energy, but it builds up lactic acid. And eventually this is going to make your muscles burn, and it's going to feel awful, and eventually you're going to have to stop. But it is a short-term supply of energy when your body is in a pickle and it doesn't have quite enough oxygen to get a normal workout completed, or if you're trying to run from a grizzly bear or whatever. So that's what it is. The difference being is that it is a mirror image of L-lactate, so this lactic acid stuff that we're familiar with. So if L-lactate is, my right hand, then D-lactate is the exact same shaped molecule, but on the right hand. And if you look at your two hands, God, this brings me back to organic chemistry, which I hated. You look at your two hands and you can't superimpose them. Like, they're the same, but they're not the same. And you can't do this. Like, they're mirror images. Just leave it at that. I'm not going through organic chemistry with you guys. But that is the gist of what I remember from the D and L isomers in organic chemistry. The relevance for the human body is that the human body has machinery in place to clear out lactic acid really, really efficiently. Now, it might not feel like that after you do a lot of sprints or something, but you actually clear lactic acid relatively quickly out of your muscles and out of your bloodstream. D-lactate, on the other hand, this guy, you don't. You only really have two methods for clearance in the liver and the kidney, and that's kind of it. You're limited to what the liver and the kidney can excrete, but usually it's not that bad of a deal because you don't see D-lactate floating around in the human body in abundance under normal circumstances. So now we get into this hot topic right now, which is D-lactic acidosis and what the implications are. So I'm going to link a couple of things in the description because I think if you're really geeky and you want to read up on this, then by all means. But there's a couple of things to know. Just like everything else that I ever talk about, just like anything else in the universe and the human body, it's not as simple as, oh my God, I have D-lactate, what is causing it? It's, and it's not like, oh, just stop taking probiotics, there you go, problem solved. It's not that simple. If you look at something like D-lactate, and you could say the same for a lot of other like bacterial end products, if you have a good, healthy gut, and your motility is going well, and you don't have a leaky gut or an inflamed gut, and you're not absorbing a bunch of crap out of your gut, pun semi-intended, then the D-lactate is going to stay in the gut where it belongs, and it might not ever cause you problems. So that's thing number one to realize, is that you could have a lot of D-lactate in your intestine, but that doesn't actually mean it's ever going to get the opportunity to breach, get past the gut barrier, like when you have leaky gut, get past the gut barrier, get into the bloodstream, get up to the liver, and overwhelm your liver's ability to clear the D-lactate, hepatic clearance. So that's number one, is D-lactic acidosis, I think, from my reading, probably is not an issue if you don't have a leaky gut. If you have D-lactic acidosis, you most likely have a leaky gut, and then that is something that you need to target and address. It's not as simple as just cut out the yogurt, cut out whatever, or just even killing the SIBO. You might have to do an actual leaky gut protocol. And I'll be damned, if you look at my SIBO mistakes video, I'll link it in the description, I think it's like SIBO mistake number 6, healing leaky gut. If you don't do that, then you're not going to get as much leverage out of treating SIBO as you maybe should. So number one is leaky gut. Number two is, as a rule of thumb, bacterial byproducts and toxins and sludge, if you want to think of it that way. The stuff that bacteria make and candida make in your gut on a daily basis, if it gets through the leaky gut, if it gets through into the bloodstream, where to go next? Your liver. Your liver is connected to your gut via the portal vein, and it's like a big old filter for a lot of things. From the stuff that you ingest, mostly though, is it's gonna bind and get rid of and try to neutralize toxins that you ingest and chemicals and drugs that you ingest. It's also really working hard every day to neutralize any crap that comes up from your bacteria and from your microbiome. The reality is that you're walking around with a full-blown soup of critters and bacteria and yeast and parasites and God knows what in your gut, and you have to have some protections against that. So A, not having a leaky gut, having that barrier that's a nice tight seal so that only nutrients can get through and not bacteria and their products. That's step number one. Number two is having a good enough liver and liver function that you can do all the chemical reactions you need to do to get rid of the crap that comes its way. And this is one of my pet peeves actually with like Facebook and social media. Every now and then I see memes pop up. It's usually that page I effing love science. But every now and then I see things come up that are like, don't fall for the detoxes, guys. If your liver isn't doing your job, then you're dead or you're going to have jaundice. And that's simply not true. You can have a suboptimally functional liver. Like you can have kind of a crappy liver or maybe enzymes that aren't working as well as they could, but you don't have liver failure or you don't have cirrhosis. So I see this moderately frequently. One easy way to look at this, honestly, is C-reactive protein. If you get this inflammatory marker, it's like $30 or something, ask your doctor to measure C-reactive protein, CRP, and if that is high, then that's a signal that your liver needs some help. If your liver enzymes are high, if your bilirubin is high, then those obviously also signify liver issues. But I see C-reactive protein elevated in a ton of my patients. Like the vast majority of my patients have at least a little bit of CRP that's elevated. And I would consider it elevated if it goes beyond about 1, which is different than what LabCorp considers elevated. But anyway, CRP is coming from, it's an inflammatory marker that's coming from the liver when the liver is flamed out. A lot of times that is bacterial endotoxin that does that. So if you have high C-reactive protein and you think you have this D-lactic acidosis and you're panicking, reading studies like this and saying, oh my God, I have brain fog, I have all the symptoms, I think I have D-lactate issues, the first two questions need to be, do I have a leaky gut that's allowing the D-lactate to get into circulation? Number two, is my liver doing a good enough job? Honest to God, you might benefit from one of those like crazy detoxes. And I don't know if I would jump on board with like a multi-level marketing type one, but how hard is it to walk over to Whole Foods or go on Amazon, get some milk thistle, some dandelion, some N-acetylcysteine, NAC, maybe a little bit of glutathione. Like you could do a pretty rudimentary but really effective liver detox, actually probably on your own, and give your liver a little bit more of what it needs to get its job done. So anyway, so that's step 2. Step number 3 is kidney. Now kidneys come up because that enzyme, that D2, what is it? I wrote down. D2 hydroxyacid dehydrogenase, for those geeks in the audience. That's the enzyme that lives in the liver and the kidney and gets rid of D-lactate. So A, if that enzyme is not working appropriately in the liver, that's a relevant piece. Number 2, if that enzyme is not working well in the kidneys, or if the kidneys are not doing a good job excreting stuff, then that could be relevant too. Well, so how do you look at kidney function? Well, you could do a urinalysis and look at, a basic, they call it a comprehensive metabolic panel. Ask for that from your doctor, certainly. If you have lupus, I would be particularly concerned about the kidney connection because lupus nephritis is autoimmune damage to the kidney. That's the result of lupus. So that I think I would pay extra attention to. There are certainly other causes of kidney dysfunction too, but this is where eating a quote-unquote alkaline diet can be really helpful, is the kidneys regulate acid and base balance and pH balance. So that might be an area of focus too. You're seeing how the functional medicine thing makes sense, right? Like the more I talk, the more I'm like, God, this sounds like what I say every damn day in my office. It's not just a matter of isolating one thing and going after it. It's not just a matter of, cutting out your probiotics and hoping for the best. It's like, you have leaky gut, you have an inflamed liver, you have sucky kidneys, you need to balance your diet and do things holistically in order to feel better. And D-lactic acidosis is, honest to God, no different than anything else I treat every damn day. Couple more points is, and these, I'm not going in any particular order, I'm just thinking of them as I think of them. If you are deficient in vitamins, particularly thiamine, vitamin B1, then that could make that enzyme in the liver and kidney sluggish and not work so hot. So that's a consideration too. If you're going to embark on some kind of a liver and kidney support protocol, that's something you might want to consider. B1 is pretty darn safe, and if you have malabsorption from SIBO or leaky gut, then it wouldn't surprise me to see low levels of thiamine. I would say, I don't even bother measuring it half the time. You could do like a Nutrival or possibly an organic acids test with your functional provider, but I mean, how hard is it to take a little bit of thiamine, go through a bottle of thiamine and call it a day while you're treating your SIBO? So I would consider doing it that way. Other points I wanted to make though is there is a kind of a catch-22. There's kind of a paradox with this D-lactic acidosis and carbohydrates. And that is, if you eat a lot of carbs, particularly simple carbs like sugar, then you're going to feed the bacteria that hypothetically are making the D-lactate in the gut and probably flaming out your gut and doing more damage. So simple sugar is not a good thing in this case. So the knee-jerk reaction may be, oh my God, I need to follow a low carb ketogenic diet. But wait, I will link to a nice little article that's in a PDF that I found a while back. I'll link that in the description too. He points out there is some research that insulin itself, the bad guy, the bad hormone, quote unquote, that everybody is trying to lower with a ketogenic diet. There's some evidence that insulin, which is released after you eat carbs, is somewhat protective from D-lactic acidosis. That if you have some insulin after a meal, it actually inhibits the absorption of D-lactate out of your gut into your bloodstream. So, keto guys, I don't know. You might not be quite on the right train. It's not that I'm anti-keto by any stretch. It's just that might not be the complete picture. You may need to reconsider just how keto you want to go. Having a little bit of insulin around from like sweet potatoes or complex carbs can be very, very beneficial in that sense. All right, a couple more points because I know this is getting to be a long video and I did not think it was going to be long. I just have a lot to say apparently. A couple more points is different bacteria make either the L-lactate, D-lactate, or a mixture of the two. I don't know if we fully understand this yet. In reading articles about this, one article says that Enterococcus species make D-lactate, another says, no, wait, they're L-lactate producers. One study said E. coli, like higher levels of E. coli is protective against D-lactic acidosis. Another article says E. coli makes D-lactate. It's all very confusing. I think it all goes back to like our level of understanding right now from the current science is a balanced, diverse ecosystem in your gut, which ultimately you're going to do with food, eating a wide variety of fruits, vegetables, FODMAPs, which I've been saying for how many years now, eating the FODMAPs, eating the complex carbohydrates, and even paleo people, I've got to say, I've come full circle on the paleo thing even. I don't even think paleo is the way to go. I think Mediterranean is probably about as close as we're going to get to a perfect diet, plus or minus a few things per the individual need of the individual. But some amount of grains, some amount of complex carbs can be productive not only against D-lactate acidosis in the first place. But B, they are going to feed different microbes and keep your microbiome as broadly complex and diverse and beautiful as possible. So that might actually be another SIBO mistake video at some point, is cutting out the grains entirely and going super, super low carb, because I do think that's another mistake that people make. But anyway, so diverse array of fruits, vegetables, complex carbohydrates, grains, FODMAPs, fiber, for God's sake. So watch my other SIBO mistake videos if you want more on that. But low FODMAP doesn't treat SIBO, it just masks the symptoms. But that, yet again, so you look at the study, right? And they said in here somewhere, I don't recall exactly how many, but a fair amount of people in the study were on the paleo diet. Here it is. 6 patients were on gluten-free diets, 3 were on the FODMAP restricted, and 1 on the paleo diet. So not a huge number of people. And then in the non-brain fog group, 2 more people were on low FODMAP. So it's not a huge portion of 38 people in this study that were on restricted diets. But right there, FODMAP and to a lesser extent paleo is going to restrict your microbiome, at least somewhat. And that favors D-lactic acidosis, and that D-lactate getting through the gut barrier, getting to the liver, and causing the kerfuffle we're talking about. All right, probably losing you. Hang in there. I have no idea how long I've been talking, but you're doing good. Last couple of points. Let's see, I talked about the insulin. 2 actually important points about the D-lactate thing is A, D-lactate in and of itself is not necessarily a bad thing, in the sense, among other reasons I've already talked about, lactate in both of the forms are then metabolized into short-chain fatty acids. So this is why microbial diversity and having a diverse, healthy, stable ecosystem in your gut is the most important thing in the whole universe you can do, I think. Is if you have one bacteria that makes a bad thing, quote unquote. So you have a bacteria that makes lactate. Oh my gosh, bad news. But if you have another bacteria that's nearby and it could use the lactate as food to produce something else that is not bad, then that's actually a really good thing to have high lactate levels, right? So what you've got is you have some bacteria making lactate, including D-lactate, OMG, run for the hills, but that other bacteria metabolize that D-lactate into short-chain fatty acids. Short-chain fatty acids are amazing and good. They're the whole damn reason that doctors have been saying for eons to eat fiber and eat FODMAPs, because you feed your gut bacteria and they produce good things, namely short-chain fatty acids that are anti-inflammatory and keep your immune system and your gut and your brain and your whole body happy and healthy. So that's a point too, is balance will help gobble up some of the lactate. Even if you produce it, or even if your bacteria produce D-lactate, you can gobble that up if you have other good bacteria to do that job. If you're squashing them down to nothing with the low FODMAP diet or with another restricted diet though, you're not going to have that second piece. So you're going to have just the lactate producer and you're not going to have enough of the guy to offset that. You want balance. The last part of this is I thought fascinating, and I will admit to you right now, I have not read on this a tremendous amount. I only just became aware of this. D-lactic acidosis has been studied, or it might be, I forget if it's in the urine or blood if they've tested this, but it has been proposed to be a very sensitive, accurate marker for gut ischemia. So what does ischemia mean? Ischemic events are like a stroke or a heart attack, but this would be in your gut. So ischemia means a lack of oxygen, the hypoxia, if you want to call it that, but it's from diminished or no blood flow to one region of the intestine. So like a transient ischemic attack, a TIA, is a stroke. If you want something analogous to that in another tissue. So D-lactic acidosis has been proposed to be a very accurate marker for gut ischemia. Really makes me rethink this article in a whole new way, coming across this, is If you have diminished blood flow from the gut, is the gut going to heal properly? No. Are you going to have leaky gut? You can bet your pants you're going to have leaky gut. Are you going to have gut inflammation? Hell to the yeah, you're going to have leaky gut and inflammation, and God only knows what else. Is your motility going to work? No. So these are things to keep in mind too. If you have SIBO and you also are anemic, or if you have SIBO and you have like some sort of injury to the area, and you have potential for ischemia, or if you have high blood pressure and that's choking off blood flow to those small arteries and veins in the gut, then that could be extra concerning. But it seems like D-lactic acid really gets through the gut barrier, not only when it's leaky, but when there's a decrease in blood flow to the gut. So keep that in mind too. Now, as far as the testing, to the best of my knowledge, the only test that you can get right now is through Mayo. And I think that's it. There is an organic acids test that's from Great Plains Laboratory. I have not gotten a chance to talk to them recently about this, but I believe the lactate that they show on their test is primarily L-lactate, or at the very least, they don't differentiate between the two. There is nothing that I could find on LabCorp or Quest when I looked, and I couldn't find another commercial lab that will do it. My hunch, and what I'm going to look into just for my own ordering sake, is on occasion I order tests through Mayo via LabCorp. And what I have to do on my end is I have to type in, there's a code that says handwritten order, and then I include the code and the name of the test that I actually want. So I do that every now and then. There's an inflammatory marker that I will run that way, and it's run through Mayo. So I wonder if I could do the same thing for D-lactate, because I do have a couple of patients that I think this would be useful to know. Namely, I have a couple of patients who have had gastric bypass, Roux-en-Y surgery. And you want to talk about the research with D-lactic acidosis. That is the population that you really need to be concerned about, is if you've had gut surgery, boom, ischemia, boom, leaky gut, but also shorter intestine, short bowel syndrome is what it's really researched a lot in. So I am looking into this, not necessarily to run this test on every one of my SIBO patients. I don't know if that would be practical or financially responsible to do, but I may look into running this test, the urinary D-lactate level, on a couple of my patients who have had gastric bypass and Roux-en-Y gastric bypass surgery and have short bowel. So I might look into that. But other than that, I'm sorry, I don't know a way to test for this. Is that the end of the world? I don't know. I think that this is all like a big hullabaloo over possibly, I think it's too early to say, actually. I don't want to say we're making mountains over molehills yet, but I think it's too early in this research to say how much we need to be concerned. One last point, and then I'm going to let you guys go, is there was a 2009 study titled Increased D-lactic Acid Intestinal Bacteria in Patients with Chronic Fatigue Syndrome. And I came across that study, but then I came across something better, which was a critique of it. And I will link that study if you want to read the critique and look more into it. If you scroll down to the title, it says Selective Interpretation of Probiotic Research Data, and then there's a section, D-lactate producing bacteria. And they actually, the authors of this study do a pretty good rebuttal to that 2009 study with the chronic fatigue syndrome cohort. The biggest thing was twofold, is that it didn't look like there was a good control. And number two, they didn't actually test D-lactate levels. They just observed, hey, we have more of the bacteria that theoretically could produce D-lactate, but they didn't actually measure D-lactate levels and correlate it with the fatigue. So I will link that too, because I think that's relevant. That 2009 study seems to have been part of what fueled this research. And it seems like that was also kind of sloppily done. But anyhow, in closing, so now that I've like either overwhelmed or frustrated or elated you, I'm not sure which, the things to know would be D-lactic acidosis seems to be a thing. I'm going to give it that. It seems to be a thing. How often it happens and in whom is still somewhat up for debate. Is it causing the fatigue and the symptoms? Probably. I think that's that one I'm going to go with. Is it caused by probiotics? I don't think. If it is, I don't think it's a big contributor. What I would say the bigger causes of D-lactic acidosis is leaky gut syndrome, subpar liver clearance, subpar kidney function and kidney clearance, gut inflammation, gut blood flow issues, SIBO, like overgrowth of bad guys, if you just have way more of the guys that produce D-lactate. But I don't necessarily think this is cause for us to all throw away our yogurt and all throw away our probiotics. And I don't think the recent study does us any favors. I think a lot of people now are just panicking, thinking that they can't take probiotics. And I don't think that's accurate. Not at this point. There's going to have to be a lot more convincing research for me to think that that's true. But I hope that you found this useful. Again, I've been talking for like, I don't even know how many minutes. So I'm gonna wrap up, but hopefully this was insightful. Thanks for hanging with me, and go take some probiotics, but try to be methodical about it.